I played every Tekken game. Here's my thoughts. So Tekken isn't a series I grew up with. Well, let me rephrase that. I grew up playing Tekken games, but they were never games I played extensively. I was more of a Soul Calibur kind of kid. That being said, Tekken has always interested me, and this is going to be a broad overview of the games in the series. And just letting you know ahead of time, I am terrible at fighting games. You probably won't see any super complicated combos or Korean backdashes. Go easy on me. Also, I just want to say thanks so much for all the support, and if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing. It really helps me out and helps my channel grow. Anyways, let's get into the games. Tekken was released in arcades in 1994 and the PlayStation in 1995. For all of these games, I'll be playing the home release versions. So before you even get into the game, there's a loading screen where you can play Galaga, which is pretty neat. While I didn't do this, there is apparently some stuff that you can unlock for beating a certain number of levels, according to a couple of places I saw online. The intro to this game is about as 90s as it gets. The characters look wacky and weirdly proportioned, but that's part of the charm. The intro isn't anything too crazy, just a montage of some action scenes. Speaking of visuals, this game has a very primitive 3D style, but it looks weirdly good. I mean, it's definitely PS1 jank, but it's got a very unique style. The stages aren't really anything to write home about, but they're fine. The stages are 3D with some 2D background elements, and they infinitely scroll, so you can move in any direction forever. As far as gameplay goes, Tekken 1 is a fighting game that takes place on a 3D arena, but I don't see any direct way to move in any direction outside left and right. Getting hit and dealing hits can knock you on a forward or backwards axis, but that's about it for moving forward and backward. For the controls, you have 2 punch attacks and 2 kick attacks. One button is assigned to each arm and each leg, and this is true for every Tekken game. You also have a couple of grabs you can do, and holding back on the pad lets you block, and you can also jump and crouch. Pretty standard fighting game stuff, closer to a 2D fighting game than you would normally associate with Tekken though for these early games. The available modes in Tekken are arcade, 2-player, and test mode. Just to get this out of the way, I am not super familiar with the Tekken cast outside of the most popular characters for each game, so I'm just going to be listing the available characters in almost every game. In the first Tekken, there's Kazuya, Jack, Paul, King, Law, Michelle, Nina, and Yoshimitsu. There's further unlockable characters in Heihachi, Anna, Ganryu, Kuma, Kunimitsu, Lee, Prototype or P-Jack, Wong, Armor King, and Devil Form Kazuya. Arcade mode is, well, the arcade mode. You fight through a series of fights, and at the end you get a fully rendered cutscene. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know a whole lot about the story of Tekken, but I do know that Kazuya's arcade mode ends with a Heihachi fight, and when you win, he throws Heihachi's body off of a mountain. It's pretty sick. Then he turns his head and does this really goofy smile at the camera. For cinematics, this is an A+, absolute perfection. You cannot top this. Well, maybe you can top this, but you can't top this moment. Tekken overall is obviously an earlier fighting game. There's not a whole lot to it. I'm sure people are going to get mad at me for saying that, but the characters feel samey to me. The animations are different for everyone, but there's just not enough variety in this game for me. Again though, this is a pretty early fighting game, so it wouldn't be fair to compare it to like modern Tekken games. Especially for someone like me who doesn't know the ins and outs of this series. Anyways, let's move on. Tekken 2 was released in arcades in 1995 and on the PlayStation in 1996. So the intro of this one shows Heihachi climbing out of whatever ravine Kazuya threw him in, which is fantastic. That means that people can keep throwing each other in ravines. While this intro is still super 90s feeling, the animation and model quality are significantly better. Also, there's this absolutely horrifying shot of Heihachi coupled with some music that I can only describe as horror techno playing when you get to the title screen. Check it out. Super spooky. This game, to me, plays a lot like the first Tekken, though it does feel a little bit more responsive. I'm sure there's some kind of significant gameplay changes under the hood, but for a casual like me, it feels like it plays almost identically. Does seem like the throws are a bit more dynamic though. Visually, it looks slightly better than the first game, but still pretty blocky and 90s looking. The characters in Tekken 2 are Heihachi, who is on the base roster this time, Kazuya, who is now an unlockable character, Anna, Armor King, Devil, Ganryu, King, Kuma, Kunimitsu, Law, Lee, Michelle, Nina, P-Jack, Paul, Wong, Yoshimitsu, Alex, Bayek, Angel, Bruce, Jack 2, Roger, Jun, and Lei. Don't worry, it's only going to get worse from here. The modes in Tekken 2 are the arcade mode, versus mode, team battle mode, time attack mode, survival mode, and practice mode. Obviously, this is a huge increase from the relatively bare bones first game, but a welcome one. The arcade mode works exactly as you'd expect. You go through a series of fights, and then at the end, at least for the characters I used, you fight Kazuya and then Devil. Then you get a nice fully rendered cutscene. Oh, and I guess while we're keeping count, Heihachi throws Kazuya into a volcano this time. I feel like this is going to turn into a common theme. Team Battle Mode allows you to create teams of multiple characters to battle. Once you get into the fight, you use the characters in order. If you defeat an enemy, it moves on to the next fight, but your character retains their HP loss. Whoever is the last one standing wins. This is pretty much how Team Battle Mode works in every Tekken game, so I'm probably not going to talk about it every single time. Same for Time Attack, which in this game is basically just the arcade mode, but it times you. Also, it seems like any settings you have from the options menu are ignored in this mode, at least the setting that changes how many rounds there are in a fight. Another mode that doesn't really change is the survival mode. In this one, it's a mode where you fight as many fights as you can with a single HP bar. I'm bad, so I could only do 2 fights. Overall though, Tekken 2 is definitely an improvement on the first game, and I'm sure there's a bunch of little changes that I just completely missed. I did enjoy the wider variety of characters, and I could just keep talking about how it feels similar, but that would just drag on. I wish I had more to say about it, but let's just move on to Tekken 3, because I have a lot to say about that game. Tekken 3 was released in 1997 in arcades and 1998 for the PlayStation. Technically, the game was released in 1996 in arcades, but according to my in-depth research, it was a super limited release. Tekken 3's intro cinematic is still super 90s, but a gigantic step up in fidelity and production value. It's bonkers how much more refined it is, especially when 3D graphics were still in their infancy. The actual visuals in-game, too, are a huge step up. Everything is still pretty blocky, but the texture work and detail is a lot better, and the backgrounds, while still 2D for the most part, are a lot more dynamic. Even the animations are so much better. Speaking of more dynamic, that also plays into the gameplay. In Tekken 3, it's a huge step up in almost every way. It feels faster, more responsive, more fluid, and there's now fully 3D sidestepping, and the movesets feel a lot more fleshed out for everybody. This is the first game that, in my opinion, feels like modern Tekken. And now for the returning characters in Tekken 3, we have Anna, Heihachi, Lei, Nina, Paul, and Yoshimitsu. The overwhelming majority of the cast is new characters, who are Brian, Dr. Boskanovich, Eddie, Gon, who is a guest character, Gunjack, Huarong, Jean, Julia, King, Kuma, La, Mokujin, Ogre, True Ogre, Panda, Tiger, and Xiao Yu. An interesting note here, this is the only Tekken game to feature a guest character all the way until Tekken 7. The modes in Tekken 3 are Arcade, Versus, Team Battle, Time Attack, Survival, Tekken Force, and Practice. Arcade mode, again, works the same as previous games. At the end of this one, you fight Ogre, and then another version of Ogre that the character select calls True Ogre. Then you get a nicely detailed, fully rendered ending scene. It's pretty awesome. I really like these ending scenes. They're really the only way you kind of get story in these earlier Tekken games, but also it's just fun to see a little reward for completing the arcade mode. To explain why I feel this way, let me talk about Kuma's ending. I know nothing about this character, but everything about this ending is just perfection. Truly a chef's kiss moment. I hope it can be topped because just wow, the bar is really high. This ending is amazing. Moving on, Team Battle is 100% identical to Tekken 2's version. Even the menu looks almost exactly the same. Same goes for the Time Attack and Survival modes. So now moving on to Tekken Force. So I had no idea that Tekken Force was even a thing. This is a super cool mode where it's Tekken gameplay but kind of transplanted into an old school beat 'em up. You take on waves of weak enemies as you push through all these stages, and every enemy is treated like its own discrete fight, and your character can lock on to one at a time, though you can hit multiple if your moves have a wide enough scope. The mode is broken into individual stages, each with a different locale. There's also a time limit in the levels which increases every time you defeat an enemy. At the end of the level, you fight a boss. Once you beat the boss, you move on to the next stage. It's a simple concept, but this mode is a lot of fun, and I think I like it even more than the arcade mode. Overall though, Tekken 3 is a gigantic improvement, and it's aged super well in my opinion. It's the first game in the series that feels truly like a modern Tekken game to me. It just feels really good to play, and I think it's a great jumping off point if you want to go back and revisit the older games. At least if you want the gameplay to be as similar as possible. On to the first weird one. Tekken Card Challenge was released exclusively for the WonderSwan in Japan in 1999. While I'm not 100% clear on how this game works since it's all in Japanese, I will explain it to the best of my ability based on what I saw. The way this game works is that you choose a character and your character has a set of cards. Every card has an ability and a number attribute. The number attribute is the most important part of the card. The game selects 4 of your cards, and when the fight commences, it cycles through them at a fast speed like a roulette wheel. When you press A, you lock in and select select a card. Then the enemy gets to do the same. Then the turn commences. Both players use their ability, but the ability with the higher number wins. If it's a tie, both players take damage. Of course, there are also cards that have 0 as their value. These are defensive cards, and getting one of these will block the enemy card regardless of its value. Also, some cards have an aerial attribute. If the attacks on these cards land, they knock the opponent into the air. If you get more aerials after that, you can keep the enemy in the air indefinitely. The enemy can't do anything to stop this until the player who got the aerial gets a card that isn't an aerial. It's honestly kind of broken, especially since I was the one on the receiving end of it every single time. So this game has a campaign-ish mode and single and multiplayer modes. The single and multiplayer modes are just one-on-one fights where you pick a character and go. The campaign mode has you navigating a map as your chosen character. Every step you take ticks down a little counter at the bottom. The goal is to pick up cards, defeat enemies, and make it to the end goal, which changes locations every time you play. There's multiple areas and the enemies get progressively stronger. It's pretty fun, though the actual core cast fights are way harder and I could not complete a single one successfully. Also, for the record, it looks like there's quite a few characters, but I have no idea how to unlock them. I still got a list though. The initially available characters are Jean, Xiaoyu, and Huarang. The unlockable characters are Anna, Brian, Crow, Dr. Boskanovich, Eddie Gordo, Law, Gunjack, Heihachi, Julia, King, Kuma, Lei, Mokujin, Nina, Ogre, Panda, Paul, and Yoshimitsu. Anyways, this game is fun, at least if I'm understanding it correctly. It's not technically part of the core series, but it's a fun little game and I'm glad I tried it. Would I go back to it? Probably not, but I would like to see this concept come back because it could definitely work as a spin-off genre for a ton of games. The core gameplay works, and I would love to see this come back. Tekken Tag Tournament was released in arcades in 1999 and the PlayStation 2 in 2000. This one's interesting because it's apparently the first Tekken game to get a graphical update from arcade to home release. In fact, the arcade version was pretty visually similar to Tekken 3, while the PS2 version seems like a massive graphical upgrade. It does look like the backgrounds are a bit more detailed though. For this video, I'll be playing the PS2 version, but I will give you a look at how different they look. On the left is the arcade version and the right is the home version. Pretty big upgrade if you ask me. The intro to this one keeps about the same aesthetic as Tekken 3's, but it's still fantastic and sets the mood appropriately. I love these intros, keep them coming. Visually, this game is a pretty big step up from Tekken 3, but that's to be expected since we're now on the PlayStation 2. The style hasn't aged super well in modern standards, but in motion it doesn't really matter. As for gameplay, this one plays very similarly to Tekken 3, but with the new element of tag-ins and tag-outs. At any point during a fight, you can tag in a partner. You can use this tactically too, because if you took damage as one character and want to swap them out, they can recover a limited amount of HP while they're tagged out. However, if either character loses all of their HP and gets knocked out, you lose the round no matter how much HP your partner has left. Additionally, if you get to super low HP, your ally's health bar starts flashing, and if you switch to them, they're powered up. So something about the way this game plays makes it feel just easier to link combos, I guess? I don't know if it's just me, but I just feel better at this game than I did at previous Tekken games. Maybe it's because I've already spent so much time playing them for this video. Either way, it's a really good feeling. So Tekken Tag Tournament has a pretty massive cast, so I'm just gonna list them all in alphabetical order. There's Alex, Angel, Anna, Armor King, Bayek, Bruce, Brian, Devil, Eddie, Ganryu, Gunjack, Heihachi, Huarang, Jack2, Jean, Julia, Jun, Kazuya, King, Kuma, Kunimitsu, Law, Lee, Lei, Michelle, Mokujin, Nina, Ogre, True Ogre, Prototype Jack, Panda, Paul, Roger, Tetsujin, Tiger, Unknown, Wong, Xiaoyu, and Yoshimitsu. Whew! That was a lot of characters. It's pretty sick though, there's so many characters to play as. The modes in Tekken Tag Tournament are Arcade, Versus Battle, Team Battle, Time Attack, Survival, One-on-One, One-on-One Versus, Practice, and Theater. The arcade mode is the same as previous games, though this time at the end you fight an enemy called Unknown. Once you beat the arcade mode, you unlock a short video with the first character you chose, which also unlocks in the Theater mode. Team Battle returns and works the same as we've seen previously, but I did want to touch on it in this game since there's a tag out mechanic. So in this game, every time you lose all of your HP, you lose the round, but your tagged out character retains their HP. At the end, someone will be left with only one character. It works pretty much how you'd expect, so I'm glad that they worked it in this way. Time Attack and Survival works exactly how you'd expect, so I'm gonna move on to the one-on-one modes. I bet you're super curious as to what one-on-one is. It's exactly what you'd expect. It's pretty much the arcade mode, but you only use one character. The last mode I'll talk about is the Theater mode. This mode is pretty basic and just lets you watch the short movies from the end of the arcade mode for the characters you've completed the arcade mode with. You can also choose their outfit for each one. Oh, and you can also watch the intro movie and character showcase. It's nifty, nothing too crazy. Okay, I guess I'll also talk about Tekken Bowl. I could feel people readying their replies in the comments saying I missed it. So when you've unlocked all the characters, you unlock a secret mode called Tekken Bowl. Tekken Bowl is straight up bowling. It's wild. You pick 2 characters to bowl a set, and the pins are trophies shaped like Heihachi's head. That was almost like a tongue twister. It's a lot of fun and a super neat little mode. This is an example of they didn't have to do this, but I'm glad they did. Overall, Tekken Tag Tournament is pretty fun, but really more of the same with the added twist of tag outs. It feels really close to Tekken 3, but that's not at all a bad thing since it does feel really good to play. The tag outs do add an extra layer to the gameplay, but I do understand also why the core series doesn't incorporate them. Overall, Tekken Tag Tournament is a fantastic game and has aged really well. Tekken 4 was released in arcades in 2001 and the PlayStation 2 in 2002, so the intro to this one raises the bar again in production value. It's pretty wild, there's even a bit of voice acting. I still have no idea what's going on to be perfectly honest, but I think Kazuya was somehow revived in a lab, and then he fights his way out of the lab, and Heihachi is pretty upset about it. Overall, though, this opening is awesome, my favorite yet. The visuals in this game are a pretty big leap, better than Tekken Tag Tournaments, at least in my opinion. The backgrounds are now fully rendered and part of the environment, unlike previous games. Speaking of, the gameplay in this feels better than ever, but there are some significant changes. The movement is now a lot closer to something like Soul Calibur in that you can move around freely in 3D space just by pressing your controller in that direction, rather than the short sidestepping you did in previous games. In order to jump or crouch, you now need to use an attack or other directional input at the same time. They also changed one of the grab inputs to instead just change your position, which took a minute to get used to. Additionally, the background environments are now part of the stages, meaning that the stage isn't just an infinite space with a moving background. This means that you now have to make sure you aren't cornered into a wall and watch where you're moving. So Tekken 4 has you choose the difficulty right off the bat. Normally that's buried in the options, but here they just want you to choose it right away. And now for the characters. The returning characters in Tekken 4 are Brian, Eddie, Heihachi, Hwoarang, Jean, Julia, Kazuya, King, Kuma, Law, Lee, Lei, Nina, Panda, Paul, Xiaoyu, and Yoshimitsu. The newcomers are Christy, Combat, Marduk, Miharu, Steve, and Violet. I got the newcomers from a wiki because I didn't actually unlock everybody in this one. The modes in Tekken 4 are Story Battle, Arcade, Time Attack, Versus Battle, Team Battle, Survival, Practice, Training, Tekken Force, and Theater. I'm eventually gonna have to stop listing the characters, it's so exhausting. This is the first Tekken game with a proper story mode. When you select the story mode, you can select any character you have unlocked and then you go into an introduction cutscene. The cutscenes have a fully voiced narration and some awesome artwork. I really enjoy this. Once you finish the introduction scene, the gameplay goes into a sort of arcade mode style gameplay loop and you fight a series of fighters. After a certain number of fights, you get more cutscenes, including a fully rendered 3D cutscene. For Jean's story, you get a series of scenes, then you fight Kazuya. Then you get another cutscene where you fight Heihachi. Then you get yet another cutscene before the credits roll. They went really hard on the cutscenes for this game, and I enjoy that greatly. Every character I tried had their own dedicated scenes, and it was super impressive. Of course, some had more than others, but it was still awesome to see. Oh, and I think I kinda sorta finally know what's going on in these games thanks to the story mode, so hey. Arcade mode is the same as previous games. The presentation does get an upgrade though. Unfortunately, there is no special scene for winning the arcade mode, but the story mode more than makes up for that. Tekken Force mode returns, and this time it has a bit of a presentation upgrade. It still plays a lot like the previous Tekken Force though, where you're fighting a bunch of enemies, but the gameplay style is still very much one-on-one Tekken style. It works though, and it's pretty fun plowing through enemies. So in the previous games, I didn't really touch on the practice modes because I'm sure everyone knows what a practice mode in a fighting game looks like. I will say the Tekken series has pretty much the pinnacle of practice modes from what I've seen though. That being said, there's now a secondary mode here called Training Mode. Training Mode is a new mode where the game walks you through a ton of moves from your selected character and your goal is to do them all as fast as possible. Not only is this a really cool way to learn new moves, it's also a cool way to learn to do them quickly. I love this mode and it's a great way to learn the movesets of each character. I'll be honest, I'm a big button masher sometimes, so learning some of these combos actually really helped me out. I don't think this mode returns in any future games, at least not in the way it's presented here, but I could be mistaken on that. So overall, Tekken 4 is probably my favorite Tekken game I've played so far, and I think I can attribute that to it feeling a lot more like Soul Calibur, a series I am actually familiar with. Of course, the game is good on its own merits too, and the Tekken series is definitely the more popular series, but I do like how close they feel with Tekken 4. Let's see how the next few games go though. Tekken Advance was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2001 in Japan and 2002 in the US and Europe. This game is shockingly really good. Visually, it's all 3D stuff converted to 2D, but it works really well. This game just looks great visually for a Game Boy Advance game. Gameplay-wise, it's obviously simplified quite a bit, but it also works really well for what it is. The movement style is like that from Tekken 3 and Tekken Tag Tournament, so you can double tap to rotate around the stage and everything. I think it's super impressive that this game has 3D movement at all. The controls are limited to punching with one button and kicking with the other, and using the right bumper to grab. Combos are super easy, and this game is very friendly to mashing, you know, to me. Of course, there are still combos and moves you can pull off with directional inputs too. The characters in Tekken Advance are Law, Yoshimitsu, Paul, Nina, Xiaoyu, Jean, Gunjack, Hwarong, King, and Heihachi, who is an unlockable character. The modes in Tekken Advance are Arcade, Versus Battle, Time Attack, Survival, and Tag Battles. Arcade works exactly as you'd expect, but this game has no story content or any extra scenes for completing it, but I mean, I'm not surprised. The Versus Battle mode requires a Game Boy Advance link cable, meaning that you have to link two Game Boy Advances together to play with another person. I don't have two Game Boy Advances, so I can't really show off this mode. The Time Attack and Survival modes work about how you'd expect, but I did want to show off the Tag Battle mode. Tag Battle is, well, just Tekken Tag Tournament for all intents and purposes. I'm surprised that the Game Boy Advance can do this kind of thing. You can tag in and out just like in the normal Tekken Tag Tournament. There's even the recovering HP mechanic for the tagged out character. So overall, Tekken Advance is great, shockingly great. It somehow brings the core Tekken experience to a machine with the limitations of the Game Boy Advance, and I think that's a huge accomplishment. Will the next EVO tournament be playing Tekken Advance? Probably not, but the game is still really good. If you like Tekken, or if you like the idea of just mobile fighting games, this game is really good. I definitely recommend it. Tekken 5 was released in arcades in 2004 and the PlayStation 2 in 2005. Now, technically there is a second version of this game, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. Alright, Tekken 5 has the coolest intro so far in the series, and what's even cooler about it is that the intro has an intro. This intro is something else. It opens up with a fight against a bunch of Jack robots with Heihachi and Kazuya. Then Heihachi gets exploded. Then there's an entirely normal intro video showcasing the cast, while the campiest song in the world plays in the background. But there's just so much to unpack here. I love this intro, it is so good. And to get this part out of the way right away, the returning characters in Tekken 5 are Anna, Bayek, Bruce, Brian, Christy, Eddie, Gonryu, Heihachi, who is supposedly dead, Hwarong, Jean, Julia, Kazuya, King, Kuma, Law, Lee, Lei, Marduk, Mokujin, Nina, Panda, Paul, Steve, Wong, Xiaoyu, and Yoshimitsu. The new characters are Asuka, Devil Jean, Thang, Jack 5, Raven, and Roger Jr. For the record, Eddie is technically just an alternate costume for Christy, but we'll get into that. So visually, this game is definitely a step up from Tekken 4. The characters are way more detailed, and the environments look great, and the presentation is top notch. The announcer is also super cool in this, which is something that carries on to future games too.
Get ready for the next battle.
A neat touch I like is that some of the environments react to the fight, like stuff in the background breaking when someone slams into it. It's little details like that that take the presentation up just another notch. The gameplay here is about the same, at least to me, you know, the fighting game noob, though it somehow feels a little bit better than Tekken 4 still. Connecting combos feels incredibly responsive, the removed grab command from Tekken 4 is back, and movement is a nice happy middle now with moving around your opponent. Now, you actually still have to double tap again to move in and out, but it kinda changes your movement mode now, so now you can choose whether to crouch or to move up and down. This game again opens right up with asking you to select a difficulty, just like Tekken 4. The difficulties range from easy to ultra hard. The modes in Tekken 5 are Story, Arcade, Time Attack, Versus, Team Battle, Survival, Tekken the Devil Within, Arcade History, and Customize. Story mode works a lot like Tekken 4's, but now includes in-engine cutscenes on top of the pre-rendered ones. At least, this is the first time I'm seeing in-engine cutscenes. The story mode itself is just as good as ever, though the difficulty curve is kind of weird. I had a super tough time with the second to last battle, but the final boss was a piece of cake, at least in Jean's story. Speaking of, Jean's story at least picks up directly from where it ended in Tekken 4, which is also pretty cool. Arcade mode is pretty different for the first time. The arcade mode technically never ends. You can fight as many fights as you want. Every character has a ranking and they all start out at beginner. Winning enough fights allows you to rank up. After every fight, you have the option to choose who you fight from the next 3 options or to just end the mode. The choices you have shows you the enemy rank, and the higher the rank, rank, the harder the fight. I like this a lot more than the previous way of handling it because in this game, it feels like you're actually working towards something. The arcade mode in Tekken 5 is great. Tons of replay value because you have a reason to play every character. No one wants their character saying beginner next to them. Oh, and this mode has a bunch of usernames for the enemy characters. I don't know where they got them, and if you know where these names came from, please let me know in the comments. The next mode I'll talk about is the Devil Within mode. Devil Within is pretty much treated as its own game with its own save file and everything. When you create a save, you can choose the difficulty level. This mode takes place directly as the intro video ends and you take control of Jean. This mode is a lot like Tekken Force, but expanded pretty greatly. It actually feels almost like a totally different game, actually. Jean's moves are a mixture of punches, kicks, and grabs. You can also block, jump, and dodge. There's even some light platforming. I'll be honest, I didn't play a ton of this mode, but I'll explain. The concept is really cool, but the mode gets really repetitive really fast. The areas all look incredibly similar, and it's just fighting enemy after enemy. I'm sure some cooler stuff eventually happens, but I found myself very quickly wanting to move on. Arcade History mode is super cool. I know I use the word cool a lot, but that's just my best descriptor for these modes. In this mode, you can play the arcade versions of the first, second, and third Tekken games, along with an unlockable Starblade, which by the way, you can play before the title screen. Not only can you play these games for as long as you want in their entirety, you can even mess with the game options in the test menu like a straight up arcade game. Customized mode is a brand new mode to this game. Here you can choose your username as well as customize characters with accessories and even outfit changes for some of the characters using a currency called Fight Money that you get from playing other modes. To my knowledge, Fight Money returns in every future game. The customization is a bit limited compared to something like Soul Calibur, but it really doesn't have to be that wacky. This is a pretty good first start for the customization. Completing the story mode once unlocks the theater, which works like it does in previous games. Here you can watch the cutscenes from the story mode you've completed along with promotional movies for the game. You also have the option to listen to what looks like any music from the game too, in kind of like a music player mode. So Tekken 5 got an updated version for the PS3 called Dark Resurrection. There was also a PSP version with the same name, but I'm mainly focusing on the PS3 version here. Unfortunately, I couldn't get my hands on the game in time for this video, but I'll still list some of the differences. Dark Resurrection made a bunch of changes and alterations. For starters, Dark Resurrection added 3 new characters: Armor King, Dragunov, and Lily. The PS3 version also makes Jinpachi playable. Eddie is also given his own character slot rather than being a costume choice. There was also some expanded customization options, a new mode on PSP called Tekken Dojo, and some altered stages. Dark Resurrection is definitely the best version of the game, and if you're looking to play Tekken 5, I'd try to get my hands on that one over the PS2 version. So overall, at the end of the day, Tekken 5 is great. By far, the best Tekken game I've played so far. Of course, that might change, but this is pretty close to perfect in my opinion, at least when talking about the core gameplay. It's packed with content, and while I wasn't a huge fan of the Devil Within mode, it still has merit, and I'm sure tons of people probably love that anyways. That being said, let's move on to the next game. Tekken's Nina Williams in Death by Degrees is a Tekken spin-off released for the PlayStation 2 in 2005. Yeah, bet you didn't expect to see this one pop up in the video. The intro to this game is kind of a mixture between the Tekken intros we're used to seeing and a weird spy movie game intro. Clearly the theme is espionage. I don't know. I'm going into this game completely blind. I didn't look up anything before I started playing this. Weirdly, this intro has like a really long supercut of a bunch of gameplay, and it does go on like entirely too long. It seems almost like they were super proud of the song they made for it and wanted the whole thing to play, but they ran out of pre-rendered cutscenes, so they just kinda had to fill time. Moving on, this game is a single-player brawler starring Nina Williams, a character in every previous Tekken game. The game opens up with an introductory cutscene where Steve Blum tells you about the Bermuda Triangle. The mood that's being set here feels almost like Metal Gear Solid, weirdly enough, and the cutscenes in this are fully voiced, and clearly a lot of time went into them. There's also an in-engine and pre-rendered in-engine cutscenes too. So after an extensive series of scenes at the start, we're finally in okay. So for the gameplay in Death by Degrees, it's very much running around and brawling. Enemy after enemy will approach you and you have to fight them all off. However, oh man, they made some strange choices with the controls. So moving around in this game feels really weird for starters. It's not Resident Evil style tank controls, but I wouldn't be surprised if you thought it was from the footage. The presentation of this game is incredibly reminiscent of Resident Evil, at least in the non-action portions. But then you can also hold down R2 and put the game into an over-the-shoulder viewpoint. While the over-the-shoulder viewpoint doesn't work work for the combat, I do wish it was the default for exploration. I'm not entirely sure what the decision-making process was behind this weird horror game presentation, but it's just really strange. Plus, there's some places where you plain can't use the over-the-shoulder camera anyways. Heck, there's even a weird underwater first-person traversal system. I don't know. Going back to the combat, the controls for that are also very strange. I guess the idea is having full freedom of direction when you're fighting, but it just never really feels right or clicks, I guess. You attack by pressing the right stick in the direction you want to punch or kick. Want to combo? Keep pressing the stick in. It feels really awkward and I never really got used to it. One thing I do like a lot is that when you filled your special gauge, you can go into this first-person slow-mo mode and choose a body part, and then you can do this Mortal Kombat style X-ray bone break attack. It always feels super nice to pull one of these off, and unfortunately you can't just pick anywhere, but when you do pick a place it works with, it's super satisfying. Oh, and one last thing about the combat. Enemies will sometimes drop weapons. You can pick those up and use them with the wonky right stick directional attack controls. It looks dumb, but I kinda like it. This is not counting the random sniper segment, which is its own thing. Overall though, this game really feels like it didn't know what kind of game it wanted to be. It's got like a spy thriller Metal Gear Solid style and atmosphere, a weird brawler hybrid battle system, and a Resident Evil horror style exploration system. It's not a bad game by any stretch, but I can understand why I'd never heard of it. It's really weird. I don't want to hate too much on it because I'm sure there's plenty of people that like it, and honestly, this game definitely is charming. I would love to go into it more in depth someday, maybe as like a standalone video, because there's a lot to this game that I couldn't even touch on in this video. I really just scratched the surface. So, that was the first 9 Tekken games. I'm gonna be honest, when I started making this video, I thought I was only covering about, well, 7 or 8 Tekken games, but I found out very quickly that there were way more. So this video is gonna be released in 2 parts. Part 2 is gonna include a couple of weird titles that you probably wouldn't expect, so keep a lookout for that within the next week. As for this one, I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I can tell you now I'm already working on the next one. It might possibly be out sooner than a week, but we'll see. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you like this kind of stuff and want to be notified of the next one, please consider subscribing. It really helps me and makes this kind of stuff possible. Anyways, as always, have a fantastic day.